Children of the Stones by Jeremy Burnham and Trevor Ray. Chapter 13. The light snapped into Matthew's streaming eyes, and still he could not see. Hendrik stood at the entrance to the tunnel with his hand on the main switch of the small junction box. "Good morning, Matthew. How do you like my playroom?" Matthew froze, wiping his sleeves across his eyes, his heart pounding with the fear of having been caught. Not merely trespassing, but spying. Now, what are you doing here? The amused voice became icy. The boy remembered the advice of an old chess master at his previous school. When about to be mated, attack. He tried his best to put on a brave front, realizing that he was probably only making himself look slightly ridiculous. "Mr. Hendrik, I've got to get back. My father's waiting for me." Feeble, he thought, but the best I can do off balance. Hendrik waited. Matthew realized that he was not going to get out of this easily. "I haven't had breakfast yet." Now, why on earth had he said that? Feebler than ever. Attack, for heaven's sake. But he could think of nothing pithy to say. The boy leaned against the wall for a moment, his legs trembling, just as they did in an examination room. Hendrik was speaking. "Ah, yes. The estimable Mrs. Crabtree. Egg, bacon, and tomatoes, no doubt. And chocolate cake?" He was teasing, surely. Guessing. How else could he know of the breakfast order? Matthew pushed himself away from the wall. "Don't go just yet. I think you owe me an explanation." That was easy. What explanation? He had no explanation. Excuses? Yes, but explanation. Matthew gulped in drafts of fresh air. Suddenly he felt the need to be out in the sunlight. The voice hardened. "Now what were you looking for?" Matthew hesitated for the last time. Then, attack, he thought. Take the bull by the thin gummies. "I was trespassing," he whispered hoarsely. Hendrik snapped. "Patently. But why?" "I thought this was just a church." Not entirely true. He could feel himself growing warm and red-faced. "Just a church. Just a place of worship." Hendrik's voice lost its edge as he thought about this. "Well, perhaps it is." He nodded across at the machinery. "You know what this is, of course." Matthew nodded, guardedly. "A computer. I like to keep in touch. Plotting the course of the stars, predicting positions at any given time. Electronics, magnetism, power. What else has man ever worshipped but power?" His voice was soft, wondering. He sounded as though the boy had touched off a thought in his mind. The question was rhetorical. The last thing he expected was an answer. It burst out of Matthew. "Knowledge? Knowledge and truth?" Hendrik stared at him coldly. "So that's your excuse. The reason why man continues to pry, to extend the narrow limits of his comprehension, to reach for the stars. But one cannot grasp the ungraspable. There are certain stars that will never be reached." He stood for a moment, lost in thought. Then he smiled, changing the mood, and threw an arm around Matthew's shoulders. Come, I'll take you back to your father. Adam was pouring himself yet another coffee as Matthew walked in, closely followed by Hendrik. Don't let me disturb you. Just wanted to see that this young rascal got back to you in time. Adam looked quizzically at his son. What's he been up to? The bacon smell about the place awoke Matthew's passion, and he ignored his father's question and went into the kitchen in search of breakfast. As he went, he heard the astronomer say, "No doubt he'll tell you to relax." No doubt he'll tell you himself. He began to relax. If it was up to him to tell his father the truth, that would be no hardship, for that was the basis of their relationship, and had always been. The inevitable question came again, but was still a surprise to Adam. There was no trace of their hurried departure about the place, for Adam had loaded the car with their gear, and it stood out of sight around the side of the cottage. So what prompted Hendrik to say, "So you're going? Leaving us?" Adam fenced. "Who told you that? I thought you had a big program of research." "I had. Two could play the impasse game." Through his tolerant smile, Hendrik tried. "You feel you know all you need to know about Milbury?" Matthew came out of the kitchen fast, juggling the hot plate onto the table. He glanced at his father and could see his tension. "All I needed to know?" "Yes. Perhaps I do." Matthew lowered his head into the plate, hating Hendrik. He stabbed a sausage. The fried tomatoes ran like blood. "So I can't persuade you to remain?" "I'm afraid not." His father sounded so defensive. It was awful. Suddenly he could not eat. The astronomer paced about, seemingly less sure of himself, less patronizing. Suddenly he seemed almost vulnerable. Was this a chink in his armored exterior? "I'm truly sorry about this," he began. He sounded sincere. "To be honest, I've taken a great liking to you two. I had hoped that once you had settled down here, we could have become, well, closer. People of your ability will be needed here in the future. There's a great deal to be achieved, not only here in the village, but soon, outside the circle." Adam made a gesture of distaste. "That's what worries me." Hendrik stopped dead, recognizing the challenge in his voice. "You're an intelligent man, Brake. Stay and help me in my work. You'll not regret it." Matthew watched his father shake his head, positive, dismissive. "No. We're away." Adam snapped shut the locks off the briefcase. Matthew shoved the untouched food away from him. Suddenly, he heard himself say, "What is your work, Mr. Hendrik?" His voice surprised him. He had had no intention of butting into his father's discussion. Adam sounded sharp. "Matt, stay out of this." The astronomer held up a placatory hand. "No, no. Let him go on." The eyes searched into Matthew's brain. Matthew shrugged. "What's the use? We all know what I'm talking about. You see yourself as a father of the village. No, more than that, you see yourself as the priest here, don't you?" From the flicker in the eyes, Matthew felt that he had touched on the truth. "What I want to know is why. Why do you need to be surrounded by a mindless congregation, all on their knees to you, all worshipping whatever it is you stand for, all in a state of..." He groped for the word. Happiness, suggested Hendrik quietly. Matthew shrugged off the prompt. Unknowing, he said firmly. To break the silence, Adam threw the door keys on the table in front of Hendrik. Matthew looked at his father, who smiled at him rather sadly. There are moments in a child's growing up which tear at a parent's heart, particularly when lessons are learned the hard way. Adam suggested, "Everything's in the car." Matthew took the cue and grabbed his father's briefcase as he left. Pulling away from the cottage, Matthew could see Hendrik standing on the doorstep, watching their departure. He had certainly looked the part of the patriarch, he had to admit. Even his eyes were smiling. Adam stopped the car at the junction with the avenue that snaked through the circle. He caught Matthew's eye, for this was the spot where he had received the first glimmering of what they had let themselves in for after the "now you see it, now you don't" sequence with the truck. The car turned right and headed for the entrance to the circle. "How did Hendrik know we were going?" "I didn't tell him, Dad." "Maybe he's a psychometrist." The suggestion was only half joking. "Or a magician." Adam shook his head, quite serious now. "Not a magician, no. Magicians deal in magic. Hendrik deals in something far more basic and terrifying. Once we're out of this place, we may be able to rationalize just what he's up to. All we've seen so far are the effects. People being made happy. People being drained of all unhappiness, of all disease, of all ambition and thought." That was certainly nearer the mark. Frightened, Matthew asked, "So that there is nothing left for them?" His father stared grimly ahead. "No life. Nothing to fight for. No reason for hope. No need to achieve." He paused as the car sped on, then added, "No humanity." Matthew could not speak. He was remembering his friends and what had happened to them at Hendrik's hands. "That's why we were trying to get out of this place." His father drove on. Two Sarsons flicked past in quick succession, and something snapped into Matthew's mind. "This is the way Lyle came," he said excitedly. Adam straight-armed the wheel, trying to get the tension out of his shoulders. "This is where we came in. This is where we met Mrs. Crabtree." He glanced at Matthew's white face. "This is where we must find the bypass." It was then that the nightmare began. Sarsons flashed by faster and faster. Matthew knew again the pain that had become sound, but this time the sound became the vicious scream of the stars in their hurtling chase through the grasp of time. Faces rushed before him, Hendrik's smile, the mouth and teeth, building terror in his mind, tearing agony from his heart. The solar serpent, villagers circling, Die with his amulet crumbling in his hand, the rabbit screaming, writhing in the snare. And all the time, the onrushing to nowhere, the painting fractured into detail but clamored for his brain. His head burst with faces of the fleeting dreams of old. As the music of the spheres died away into his other consciousness, leaving a dry slice of sound, fluting, like a knife, through the blackness of his existence. Then there was the sound, far away, of a car crashing. Then there was the relief of silence. Matthew was the first to stir, and his eyes opened lazily upon complete darkness. But he knew instinctively that he was in a room. He was lying on something soft. A bed? And not far away, he could hear gentle snores. His questing hand felt the silk of a bedside lamp, and the sudden light brought him off the bed into the middle of the room. His father sat up gingerly on the bed's twin, disheveled, but apparently unhurt. "Dad, are you all right? Where are we?" The room was spacious, paneled, furnished with more than comfort in mind. Adam stared about him, surprised and uncertain. "We hit a sarsen. A great stone was in the middle of the road." Matthew tried to remember. His father was wrong. Not a stone. No, it wasn't a stone. We couldn't have missed it, and traveling at that speed. Matthew struggled on. "It was gray. Like a stone, but it was human. But not human. It was enormous." He stood over his father with his arms outstretched, trying to encompass a description of what he thought he had seen. They both realized, at the same moment, what it was that Matthew was trying to remember. "Dad, it was her." Impossible. Adam shook his head, but he knew it was not impossible. "That's what Lyle saw, too. It was her, but huge. Unearthly." Adam fought the possibility. A delusion. Matthew felt the chill creep to the very center of his being. "Mrs. Crabtree," he whispered. Could it be? The door of the room opened, and there stood Hendrik, benign and avuncular. Behind hovered Link with a silver tray set with drinks. All very civilized. "Good evening," he beamed. "My sleeping guests awake." Link busied himself with the drink tray while Hendrik moved about the room, switching on various lights to make the place less gloomy. It really was a superb room. "And how are we? The good Dr. Lyle seems to think you showed no sign of hurt. I trust he was correct in his assessment." Adam cut across the flow of urbanity. "How did we get here, Hendrik?" "Fortunately, Link here, returning from a shopping expedition, came across your car at the entrance to Linnet Avenue. You were both unconscious. Fumes! Do you imagine? Carbon monoxide from a damaged exhaust." Sweetness itself, thought Adam. Most reasonable. But false. "No, it's simpler than that, I think. We lost our way." "Is that possible in Milbury?" "Not geographically. We missed the turning, the time turning. We failed to get through to our present." For a moment, Hendrik looked taken aback, but he quickly recovered, assessing Adam thoughtfully as Link handed around the drinks. "Dear me. Would you care for Link to contact Dr. Lyle? Perhaps he could take another look at you." The inference was obvious. Adam shrugged it aside. "We seemed to crash into an obstacle. We were doing 40 miles an hour when we hit something. Whatever it was, there was no way I could avoid it. Then I blacked out." Matthew nodded vehemently. "That's exactly what happened." Hendrik nodded with understanding. "But your car? Totally undamaged. Take a look out the window, Matthew." Despite the gloom outside, there was a car on the graveled drive, obviously in good order. Now, How about telling Lyle about these hallucinations of yours? I feel responsible. You are my guests, after all. Adam found the unruffled plausibility galling. He burst out on the verge of losing his temper. Keep your doctor, Hendrik. Matthew was close to the truth this morning, wasn't he? Priest is not quite right, though. How do you think of yourself? As a magus? The mask slipped for a moment, and Matthew could see the ice beneath the suave exterior. Hendrik picked on the hovering link. Get out. He snapped, and the man merged away through the doorway, closing the oak behind him so carefully that Matthew could not hear the handle turn into place. Hendrik resumed his smile, but it was becoming less affable. You're going too far. Too fast, my dear Brake. There are aspects which even I find difficult to understand. Your own arrival in Milbury, for instance. He seemed genuinely at a loss. Adam kept up the pressure. Matthew realized that his father had not actually lost his cool, but was trying to force Hendrik into emotionalizing the situation. He had spotted the crack in the armor and was now pressing for an opening. Get us out of here. That's all we want from you, magus. Adam made it sound like a dirty word, but Hendrik was not to be drawn. He was indeed a master. Magus. Indeed. A scholar-magician leading his people toward beauty and truth. He sounded almost sad. Lonely. You are not halfway right, Professor Brake. There was a moment while he recovered himself, and then the smile again. Forgive me. You must want to freshen up. He pushed open a door which led to the adjoining bathroom and moved the door through which he had entered. I'll leave the tray. I'm sorry you missed our little celebration this afternoon, but don't worry. There'll be another tomorrow. He glanced from his watch to the digital clock on the mantel over the fireplace. Dinner in exactly 55 minutes, and closed the door behind him. Matthew threw himself miserably across the bed. So they had a happy day for Margaret and Sandra. Adam nodded grimly and started inspecting the room. And tomorrow's will be for us. We've got to get out of here. Dad, there's no way out of the circle. Di told me. There's no way out until the stones release us. Mumbo-jumbo. We're in a now parallel to our own, a time shift caused by the energies received here within the circle. What we must do is hang on to our sanity and use our knowledge, our understanding, to reverse the situation. Matthew decided to play the pat-ball game by which they had often thought a problem through together. Bounce the ideas about, and sometimes the right spark is struck. But how? Escape from the circle by reversing the effects of this psychic power? Not much of a shot, but it was difficult to apply logic to such an illogical situation. Adam only managed. There must be a way. Even if there's no escape from the circle. I don't believe that. If there's a way in, there must be a way out. Matthew continued hesitantly. There's the sanctuary. It may not be a way out, but it's supposed to be a place of safety. Adam moved to the window and looked out at the massive circle of stones. First, we've got to reach it. Matthew began to feel the excitement grow. It's still inside the stones. There's nothing to stop us. Adam's face set grimly as he turned back to his son. Nothing. I'm afraid there is, Matt. Matthew sprang across the room as, outside, the ancient, ululating chant began. The sound was like a wall hemming them in. At the window, his father held him in both arms so that the despair would not overpower them both. In the moonlight, the circle of villagers was forming again.